Our speaker for today is Pierre, a retired United States Marine Corps officer who has received 3 Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medals, 2 Navy Commendation Medals for leadership. After serving his country, Mr. Lewis returned to the Daytona Beach area and began a long career of working with and mentoring at-risk youth. He became the youth director for the Boys and Girls Clubs and later became the director of marketing and research development for that organization, and served as program director and facilitator for the Passport to Manhood Rites of Passage program. He has served as treasurer for Mad Dads, Men Against Destruction, Defending Against Drugs, and participated in the Daytona Beach Visioning Committee and the Daytona Beach Police Department's Weed and Seed Committee. Currently, he serves as director of neighborhood networks for the Daytona Beach Housing Authority. Mr. Lewis has been active in Toastmasters for many years. He is president of the Wildcats Global Toastmasters and is a member of the Daytona Beach Toastmasters and the Advanced Pacesetters Toastmasters Club. Today, Pierre Lewis will tell us how to be a gentleman when the rest of the world is wearing baggy pants. Pierre Lewis.
Thank you. Wow, that mic came in very loud. Okay, I guess I don't need this one. Thank you, Cliff, and to everybody that's here, good morning. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and it was a pleasure this morning to actually be in your discussion group. That was the first time I had seen that discussion group growing on, and it's interesting because that kind of parlays right into the conversation that I talk about today, about how to be a gentleman when the rest of the world is wearing baggy pants. And the thing is, I'm glad to be here, and I'm also glad and overjoyed to see some friends here in the audience. Barbara, one that helped me here. I see a couple of friends that I see some hands waving, but I don't want to leave anybody out, so I'll just say everybody that's waving is my friends that's there. So I'm glad. So everybody wave. Right. So now we know everybody that's got here. But it touched on a subject, and it empowered me to think about something when a friend of mine years ago asked me to come and talk to a group. It was about 1 year before I was retiring from the Marine Corps. And a friend of mine said, well, Pierre, I've got a group of at-risk kids. This is when I was in Washington, D.C. I was doing liaison work at Andrews Air Force Base and for the White House and the Pentagon. And she said, there's kind of some kids here, young boys. I'd appreciate if you could come in and talk to them on one of the career days and talk to them, do that gentleman thing that you do. Right, exactly. I'm thinking to myself, the gentleman thing I do, what do you mean? She says, well, come and talk to young boys about honor and commitment and what it is, personal responsibility, as we talked about. I said, okay, at-risk kids, I've talked to Marines all over the world. Surely I can go in and talk to a group of first graders that are at-risk kids. I've led Marines from here to Russia, Thailand, you name it, I've been there. She said, great. So I went to the class. The kids were seated there. I had to introduce myself. Well, boys and girls, my name is Warrant Officer Lewis. I'm a United States Marine Corps officer. I'm a liaison for the White House. That really didn't get their attention. I thought I was being impressive. They're 6-year-olds. You know, the attention span is what? Every 5 minutes something has got to happen? So I mentioned to the kids, I said, okay, I'll tell you what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to be great Americans. That's what Marines always do. So everybody stand up. I had them all stand up. We'll do a Pledge of Allegiance. So we did our Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. After we finished the pledge, I said one thing about a good Marine, a good service person, is you want to be in fighting shape. You want to be in tip-top shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you how to march. So we started doing this march. Left, right, left, right, left. We were going about 15, 20 minutes. All of a sudden I looked around. I was the only one marching. All the kids were laying on the floor. They were tired. You know, they had that pose, they stopped right there. They're exhausted. I'm still marching. I'm in, as they call it, the zone. And there he was. I'm assuming he was their captain at the time. He was a 6-year-old. He stood there and he looked at me and he said, Mr. Player, because he couldn't really say Pierre, he said, Mr. Player, your voice is loud and you're hurting our ears. I said, young man, that's a Marine empowering voice that's there. He says, but it's still hurting our ears. And you're making us do the same thing that we already did in kindergarten. I said, you march? He says, no, that's the hokey pokey. You put the left hand in and the right hand in, and you shake it all around. He said, we've already did that before. I said, young man, this is not the hokey pokey. He said, well, it's the same movements. So I looked at him, and I says, do you realize that I have friends that sit me here that work with the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA? He put his hands on his hips. He says, do you realize I've worked with the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s? This was not working, ladies and gentlemen. I stared at him and looked him in the eye again. I said, do you realize that I'm visiting from the White House? He said, do you realize that my house is blue? I said, young man, I have friends that are Navy SEALs. He said, my dad took me to Marine Land and I saw the SEALs the other week. My friends, I was suffering from what the Marine Corps terms to all Marines, PTCD, post-traumatic child disorder. But as he looked at me and I stared at him, now I'm only 5'8", so when I looked him right in the eye, we were at the same level. So I looked at him and he said, Mr. Player, the reason that you talk about all this fighting all the time is because you haven't learned to love. You haven't learned to talk to people. You ever have one of those epiphany moments when somebody says something and then all of a sudden it just, boom, it just hits you right there? He was a 6-year-old. He'd only been a captain for, 6 years? 3 years tops? I'd been one for 21. Now, I won't say it changed my life, but I will bring this discussion to you and let you know that I never forgot that moment. So it was about a year later, as I said. It was time for you. When you're an officer, you don't re-enlist. You decide whether you're going to stay in the Marine Corps a little bit longer or not. It was my chance to decide what I was going to do. I had went back to the White House and the Pentagon, and everything was in disarray. We were talking about certain missions. And I said to the fellow officers, I said, you know why we're doing this? Because we haven't learned to love. They said, what? The general said, are you kidding me? What did he just say? I said, because we haven't learned to have a discussion with one another. What is he drinking? I knew that something had occurred from that conversation that had happened a year ago. Didn't really know what it was, but I started reading all these different kind of books. I mean, I'd read all these books. Do you realize that we've only been at war, we've been at peace 8% of the time in the last 200 years? Isn't that something? That means 92% of the time we have been where? At war. So not only did I have to change, they had to change, we had to change. I mean, a great man, I read one of his books, what he said? Be the change you wish to see in the world. I started reading that book. Imagine taking that book to the Marine Corps Officer Club. Yeah. It was not the topic of discussion. However, I moved on, but the most inspirational thing was this young man and that incident reminded me of me. I started beginning to thinking, how did I get, I won't say so far, I got to this point. And you got some of those phrases that your mom or your dad kind of left with you, like don't cross the street without looking both ways, be good, be honest, those things. My mother always left me with this one phrase. Well, she's still here, but she'd always say to me, Pierre, be a gentleman. Be a gentleman. Now, I have 6 sisters. I'm the only guy. So growing up, I thought being a gentleman was the guy that got the door all the time. Because whenever the girls, we will somewhere, get the door, be a gentleman, get the door, be a gentleman. So every time I see somebody get in the door, I'm like, oh yeah, he's a gentleman. Because that's what I think it is. Now, if your mother tells you to be a football player, you have a reference point of a football player. If your mom says be a basketball player, you can see basketball players on TV. If your mom says be a doctor or lawyer, you have a reference point of that. But if your mother says you need to be a gentleman, what's your reference point? You don't really know. I don't want to date myself, but I'm growing up in the 60s, so I'm trying to find out what a gentleman is. So one time I'm sitting on the couch. I'm sitting in the living room, I should say. Father's on the couch, mother's in the kitchen. And there's a play, a movie that was on. It was Camelot. If you ever know the story of Camelot, it's about King Arthur. And King Arthur's standing in front of a group of people. And it's a big round table. And he's explaining that philosophy of having a round table. That it meant that what? All the thoughts and philosophies were equal. It meant that people had their shared thoughts. They may have been different, but they were equal. They may have been different, but everybody respected each other's opinion at this round table. Now let me pause just a moment. My father's name is King David, which is King David out of the Bible. But as a child, no, I just know it's King David. Growing up in the 60s, my mother's got these pictures of this other king, Martin Luther King. My grandmother's got pictures of Martin Luther King. Here's a guy on TV, King Arthur. So my mother says, what are you going to do? I'm going to be the king. Because everybody around is kings. And you said to me that the king was a gentleman. In my mind, of a 6-year-old, I'm thinking, okay, the king is a gentleman. My dad's a king. I got Dr. Martin Luther King. I got King Arthur. They're talking about being fair to everybody. And then my mother would come from the kitchen and she'd say, so that's what you want to do? You want to be the king? And I said, yes, I'm going to be the king. And by that time, she'd look over at my dad that's scrawled out on the couch and she'd say, you want to be the king? And I'd say, well, yeah, but I don't do the cows. But I took that same idea, that philosophy. This was 60s. We were starting to integrate from Turkey to Tomoka. When we first got to Tomoka Elementary School, got to the class, the chairs are all like this. The kids were being very disruptive. Miss Riles was my teacher. And she says, I'll be right back. I guess she was going to get Mr. Mullins, who was the principal at the time. And I figured that at 8, I knew what was wrong. The chairs weren't round. So I told all the kids, let's put them all in a round circle. So we put them all in a round circle together. And when she came back, she said, what is going on? I said, well, the reason they're arguing is because the chairs and the tables are square. And they're supposed to be round. Young man, where'd you get that from? Because I'm the king. Go to the principal's office. She did that, because, at that time when the cure for ADHD was BELT. That was another story. But she sent me to the principal's office so many times that when I came here to the principal's office, she says, oh, yeah, here's the king again. I never forgot that. I remember that. So I went back to my neighborhood. Since it didn't work at school, I said, okay, there's George Schultz that lives around the corner. He was German at the time. Now remember, we're talking the late 60s, early 70s here. We were just starting integration. And then I got Jaime, who was Hispanic. I didn't know, he just lived around the corner. I just knew he was different than me. And I got Christina, she was from Sweden, and that was in my neighborhood. So I was forming my own round table in my own yard. So my mother would come home from work, she'd see us in the backyard, and the first thing she says, boy, I don't know why you got my sheets around your neck. Because I would take her best sheets and put them around my neck because I was the king. But the philosophy I was trying to pass on to the kids in the neighborhood was the fact that we were all equal. We were working towards the same common goal. So I kept that, the round table effect. As I mentioned, I always thought that being a gentleman was yes, ma'am, no, sir, opening doors. But the essence of being a gentleman is the character the character that says that you not only have respect to be able to say to someone, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, I'll get the door, but you respect what they have to say. You respect their differences. Those were the things I wanted to get across to people about how to be a gentleman. But I really wasn't exposed to sort of baggy pants until I had fully retired. Another conversation comes around. I was on the police department's weed and seed board. A friend of mine says, Pierre, you're doing nothing but hanging out on the beach every day. And I was literally doing that, hanging out on the beach every day. She says, we've got a group of kids at the Boys and Girls Clubs. They need some of that gentleman thing you do. What gentleman thing? You know, teaching them about honor, about respecting all people, races, colors, creeds, ideas. So I created a course called the Young Gentlemen's Club. From that, I was going to teach the young men about respect and tolerance. Or rather, they were going to teach me, as one of them said to me. Because when I first went to the Boys and Girls Clubs, because of where it was located at, the young man said to me, hey, Mr. P, guess what? You're in the hood now. The hood? I said, no, I'm in the neighborhood. He said, no, you're in the hood now. I said, no, my friends, here's the thing. Never separate the neighbor from the hood. Because once you begin to separate the neighbor from the hood, you forget the most important part of that. Remember that passage that says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's the message I wanted to get across to them. Don't lose the neighbor portion. It's not the hood, it's the neighborhood. So I created the course for 10 weeks to teach young men about tolerance, civility, how to conduct yourselves, how to champion the causes of respect for all people and respect themselves. Now, it didn't come with its own challenges, because growing up as a Cub Scout, a Weebelo, a Boy Scout, police explorer, right into the Marine Corps, right into the Boys and Girls Clubs. I guess I was what the kids call L7. You know, if you put an L and a 7 against a square. So I guess that was what so behind my back, oh, here comes Mr. L7. Okay, because there's certain things I guess I didn't know, because I grew up kind of straight-laced. I didn't know certain things. We went out, said we're going to do community service. We went out to clean the area. And when we used to do humanitarian missions in the Marine Corps, we'd have these Ziploc bags. And we'd take the Ziploc bags and put vegetables in them and give them to people in Haiti or other countries. We do those type of things, drop off UNICEF bags and things like that. But what happened was, as we started to pick up going around in the area that we were at, they had these Ziploc bags too, but they were very small Ziploc bags. Some of you are nodding your head, you know. Well, I didn't know. The small Ziploc bags that I would walk around, and they were on the ground, and I'd say, wow, these people are really poor. Look how small the vegetable bags are. And a 12-year-old said, what? That's not a vegetable bag. I said, Rich, she said, no, that's a dime bag. And I said, well, you can't save very much money in that bag. She says, where is this guy from? She says, no, Mr. Player, that's for weed. How much yard work can you do in that little bag? I know we built a relationship between the square and the kids, but I left them with the same ideas that I'd like to leave with you today, that I taught them over that 10-week period of time of how to be a gentleman in today's society. And I'll give you those 10 principles that I created for them today. 1, always set the example. If you want people to love, love first. You want people to give first. Keep your word. Be on time every time. Do not lie, cheat, or steal. Something we talked about this morning. Take responsibility for your actions. And this is my key. Practice proper planning principles. That's one that my father always mentioned to me. He said, well, you know, son, here's the thing. Monday is not a surprise. God's not fooling you. You got Sunday. It doesn't go Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday. It's been going Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday for how long? Longer than I've been living. So it's not a surprise that you got to go to school on Monday. It's not a surprise that I got to get to work on Monday. So my staff, he was a supervisor, he said when they come to me and say, oh, I'm late because I didn't know Monday was going to happen. You didn't know Monday was going to happen? You knew Friday that Monday was going to happen, what, 2 days later? So why not plan for it? He'd always leave with that. Monday is not a surprise. That's one of the conversations we have in the class. So practice proper planning principles. Be proficient in your chosen endeavor, whatever that endeavor is. You want to be a doctor, lawyer, vocation, education. Know yourself and seek self-improvement. I was teaching something called Kaizen, which is total quality leadership. It means continuous improvement. It's something that I teach the kids to always do. You may not be that rocket scientist, but attach yourself to that person that does that rocket science and be as best as you can. So always seek self-improvement every single day. Number 9, make and follow through on your decisions. And here is number 10, the most important lesson that I ever have learned and ever have taught to young men. And that is to work hard to improve self, family, and community. The larger community, as we all know, is the community of humanity. If you adopt the philosophy, adopt that concept in your mind, that it's a round table, not a square table. It's a round table. And people are seeking those same goals that you are seeking. A level of significance, to be loved, to care for, to live a joyous, happy life. You too can be a gentleman when the rest of the world is wearing baggy pants. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. Please rise as